It's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rate clause. Well more than a year since Alison Thewlis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rate clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rate clause was somehow double support for women and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time to aim high, look resolutely outwards, and never, ever accept second best. Above all, it's time to believe that we can. We can build that better country we know is possible. And friends, we will.
If you enjoy watching our programmes, please help us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster by signing up to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles. And all the opinions you'll need, whether it's digital or by post. Subscribe now to iScot.
Start shortly. The proceeding will 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 start shortly.
Order. Questions to the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster and Minister for the Cabinet Office. Mark Pawsey.
Number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is important to all suppliers, not least small businesses, that they are paid on time. That's why I've announced that from this September we will exclude suppliers from winning contracts if they fail to pay their subcontractors on time. And just this month I contacted all suppliers reminding them of this intention.
I welcome what the Minister's just said, but a significant proportion of government procurement is on construction projects where there are often poor payment practices, such as were exposed in the collapse of Carillion. In its campaign, Fair Pay, Fair Play, everyone deserves to be paid on time, the Federation of Small Business is asking for those projects to be made the subject of separate project bank accounts. Is that something the Minister is considering?
Minister Dowden.
Yes, well, my honourable friend raised an important point. The government already uses project bank accounts on all construction projects unless there are compelling reasons not to do so. These, though, are just one way of ensuring our underlying objective, which is prompt and fair payment. It sits along initiatives such as paying our suppliers on time, excluding late payers, and appointing prompt payment non-executive directors in all departments.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bearing in mind that it is the small businesses that are the backbone of our economy, can the Minister outline when we can expect to see the follow-through of the proposed policy which said that you would be unable to win government contracts unless you are seen to make prompt payments?
Minister.
The Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right to remind the House of this commitment. In November of last year I announced that from September of this year we will be bringing it into practice, and what that will mean is that if companies fail to pay their suppliers on time in 2 consecutive quarters they will face being excluded from government contracts.
Which government departments have the best record in paying their suppliers on time and which the worst?
Well, I can tell the Honourable Gentleman that the latest data shows that 10 of the 16 government departments were meeting the target of paying 90% of people within 5 days, and 10 were also meeting the target of at least 96% of invoices within the 30-day target. So it's a good record overall.
John Trickett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, his own department saw a 3-fold increase in late payments over the last couple of years. Yeah. And obviously, they, as we know, diverted from their day jobs by daydreams of a new Prime Minister. And this distracted government is therefore raising incompetence to a completely new level. Yeah, that's right. And we've seen that they are careless when paying SMEs who provide services to the public. And yet SMEs are the backbone of our economy. And yet they are very careful when it comes to outsourcing to wounded giants like Interserve or failed dinosaurs such as Carillion. Isn't it time he and his department got their act together?
Well, I can assure you I'm dreaming of nothing other than supporting my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, in her continued position as Prime Minister. And he raises the performance... sadly, I don't have a note on that point, but I can also reassure him on the point in relation to prompt payments in my own department, the Cabinet Office. According to the latest figures, in March, we paid 88% of all our suppliers within 5 days and 98% within 30 days, a perfectly credible record.
Errol Murray.
Number 2, please, Mr. Speaker.
Brandon Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are all indebted to this groundbreaking Conservative Member of Parliament who won her seat the year after women first got the vote. The government is using the Suffragette Centenary Fund to support some 350 projects, including training in political leadership in Bradford and Birmingham and skills sessions in the East Midlands, West Midlands and London.
Gerald Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my right honourable friend join me in welcoming plans to commemorate Lady Nancy Astor, the first woman to take her seat in the House of Commons, with a statue in Plymouth?
Absolutely. I'll say to my honourable friend that I not only welcome the extraordinary efforts of the campaigners who have achieved funding for a statue for Nancy Astor through public donations, particularly as there are, let's be frank, too few statues celebrating and commemorating the amazing contribution that women have made to helping shape our nation. I particularly congratulate my honourable friend on the work she has done in supporting this project.
John Cryer.
Mr. Speaker, can we also remember the 2 pioneering women who followed Nancy Astor very closely shortly after her election. I'm talking about the Liberal Margaret Wintringham and the great MP for West Ham, Susan Lawrence.
Absolutely, very happy to do that. As I said, I think there are too few memorials and commemorations of the great efforts and contributions made to society through women throughout the ages, and I'm very happy to congratulate all those who do their bit for public service.
Patrick Grady. Mr. Speaker, well, of course, 2 years ago we celebrated 50 years since Winnie Ewing was elected to the House of Commons, and perhaps that should be reflected here. But I don't know what the government would do to celebrate Nancy Astor that it wouldn't do to celebrate Constance Markievicz, who was the first woman to be elected. But where the Scottish Government recently held a consultation on electoral reform, it specifically included ways to improve gender and minority representation. So will the government do the same thing and bring forward real proposals?
Well, actually, if I remember correctly, she didn't actually take her seat, but I do, as I say, congratulate anyone who has contributed not just to public life, but as I say, I think there is work for us all to do to make sure we are highlighting and premiering the fantastic developments made across our country by women over the years in a whole range of public service roles, and I think that's a good thing to encourage more people to do it in the future.
Neil O'Brien.
3, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while the government can and has been managing the security risk, it is essential that the cyber security and engineering flaws in Huawei products are fixed. The National Cyber Security Centre has set out the improvements we expect the company to make and will not compromise on the improvements we need to see, in particular sustained evidence of better software engineering and cyber security.
O'Brien.
I wondered if the Minister could provide an update to the House on the distinction the government is making between different types of infrastructural equipment from Huawei and how that will be used to respond to the recommendations of the Centre. Well, we have the independent Huawei Cyber Security Evaluation Centre to look at what the company is doing in order to meet the commitments we require of it. Looking to the future, Mr. Speaker, the government is committed to taking decisions on the 5G supply chain based on evidence and a hard-headed assessment of the risk. We've undertaken a thorough review of that supply chain, and the decisions of that review will be announced in due course and to this House first.
Dan Jarvis.
Mr. Speaker, given the concerns about Huawei's involvement in our 5G network, what more can the Secretary of State say about what steps are being taken by the government to secure our critical national information infrastructure?
What I can say to the honourable gentleman is that, from the government's point of view, the security and resilience of the UK's telecoms networks is of paramount importance. We think we have robust procedures in place to manage any risks to national security today. In looking forward to the rollout of 5G, we've got 3 clear priorities here: stronger cybersecurity practices across the entire telecom sector, greater resilience within individual telecoms networks, and, crucially, diversity in the supply chain for 5G. It's matters that go beyond any single company.
Mr. David Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor of Duchy will know the government's about to award a £300 million contract, including requirements to host British citizens' biometric data. In order to protect the security and privacy of British citizens, can you guarantee that data will not be held by foreign companies subject to foreign government laws giving foreign government access to British citizens' private data?
Well, clearly, any tendering exercise that the government undertakes has to be subject to the normal rules about open public procurement, but I know that the Home Secretary, who is responsible for this particular proposed database, will give the highest priority to ensuring the security of that sensitive personal data.
Platt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It has been reported that the Prime Minister has given Huawei the green light to help build the UK's 5G network against the advice of ministers, our international allies and our security services. Yet Huawei have themselves said that it will take up to 5 years to secure their equipment. So why does the government have more confidence than Huawei in their ability to safely and securely build our 5G network?
That's right. Well, as I said in response to her honourable friend, the member for Barnsley, the security and resilience of our telecommunications networks is of paramount importance in every decision the government takes on these matters. We have undertaken a very thorough review of the entire
5G supply chain. That is designed to ensure that we can roll out 5G in a way that is secure and resilient. We will announce our decisions about that to this House in due course.
Brown.
Question 4.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government is committed to supporting measures to reduce the size of the other place, where they can command consensus across both houses, such as the positive trend in retirement. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is also committed to continuing the restrained approach she has maintained on appointments.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister mentions consensus, but the reality is, due to Brexit and the failed PM leadership, this House is completely gridlocked, which actually gives the bishops, the hereditary peers and the unelected lords in other place more power than ever and a greater say in Scotland's future than the Scottish Parliament itself. Does he agree with the Scottish Tory colleague, the MSP Murdo Fraser, that other place needs scrapped?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The last week we sat, the Scottish National Party were praising the House of Peers. This week they're calling for them to be scrapped again. For me, the focus now, with the issues facing this country, is to get on with delivering a Brexit deal that works for the whole United Kingdom, rather than focus our time on building constitutional grievances like the separatists wish to do.
Michael Fabricant.
May I congratulate my honourable friend on his appointment to the front bench and his outstanding responses just now. Notwithstanding any reservations we may have about the unelected place, is it not the case, though, that on occasion the standard of debate there can be a lot higher than here?
Well, I thank the honourable member. I'm sure over his 27 years in this House he'll have seen plenty of very high standard debates. In fact, him contributing to raising that standard on many occasions. But the House of Lords plays a special part in our Constitution as a revising chamber, subject, as always, to the supremacy of this elected House.
David Linden. 5. The honourable gentleman's pardon. I think the honourable gentleman wants to come in from the front bench. Yes? Let's hear the fella. Tommy Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I welcome the Minister to his place. Unelected, out of touch, unresponsive. The House of Lords is not just a relic from a bygone era, it is a stain on our modern democracy. When is this Cabinet team going to live up to its public duty and lead a serious constitutional debate in this country to modernise our democracy and get rid of the House of Lords?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think, as I touched on earlier, the vast majority of people in this country, certainly in Torbay and across the rest of the UK, would not see this House spending months in constitutional navel-gazing as the top priority at this moment. Yes, the House of Lords is something that many people have talked about reforming over the last century, and the Government will look at proposals that could enjoy broad consensus. But for now, with the pressures on the legislative programme, few would understand if we decided to dedicate months to this one.
David Linden. Number 5.
Thank you. I'm pleased to tell the House that from the 1st of April, the Government increased the national living wage by almost 5% to £8.21 per hour, which gives an annual pay rise of almost £700 to full-time workers on the national living wage. This is our preferred approach to addressing low pay across both the public and private sector.
Of course, the national living wage isn't actually a real living wage, and it doesn't apply to under 25, so that's an absolute load of mince, frankly. But why would the Government want to perpetuate age inequality in terms of pay? And is he actually proud of the fact that this Government actively discriminates against young people, including his own civil servants?
I do find it extraordinary the way the honourable gentleman denigrates the national living wage. The national living wage has handed a pay rise of £3,000 to the lowest paid workers since it was introduced, and it's actually rising faster than the real living wage. Of course, in respect to this question about under 25s, we need flexibility for younger workers to help them get into the labour market. I think that's a sensible compromise.
Chris Elmore.
And
reality is, Mr Speaker, that the government's living wage is not the living wage set by the Living Wage Commission. But that aside, can the Minister set out what representations he's made to IPSA to ensure that members of this House can become living wage employers? Because my understanding is they won't let us do it.
Shane.
Well, relations with IPSA are a matter for the Leader of the House, not for the Cabinet Office ministers such as myself, but I have heard his representation. I'm sure the Leader of the House will have heard them as well.
What I can add, which I hope will be of some reassurance to the honourable gentleman, is that the House of Commons is indeed an accredited living wage employer and has been for some time. I hope that warms the cockles of the honourable gentleman's heart. Kerry McCarthy.
6, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, the Government will work closely with the police and electoral administrators to tackle any reports or allegations of intimidation, as we do in the run-up to all elections.
Kerry McCarthy.
I'm very glad that the Minister is taking it seriously. There will be so many of us in this House that have seen an escalation of threats and abuse in the current political climate, and there's a real fear when you have the likes of Nigel Farage saying that the European elections are an opportunity to put the fear of God into politicians, that people like that run the risk of stoking up that kind of intimidation and aggressive behaviour. What can he do to try to ensure that everyone conducts the European elections in a moderate, temperate and rational way?
Well, I think, Mr Speaker, that there is a responsibility on politicians of all political parties, left, right and centre, to try to conduct elections in a spirit, yes, of democratic argument and debate, but also in a spirit of mutual respect for the fact that in a pluralist democracy we are entitled to disagree, to express our disagreement, to accept the election result, however that turns out, and then to get on with people of other parties who have an equal democratic mandate to our own.
Mrs Theresa Villiers.
I recently had the honour to co-host a conference on misogyny and anti-Semitism, and can I urge the Government to do everything it can to make sure these two forms of hate crime do not prevent women participating in elections and making their voices heard in the democratic process?
I agree wholly with what my right honourable friend has just said. I think one of the most shocking features I found about life in the House of Commons in the last few years is to learn, in particular from women MPs of different political parties, how they have often been singled out for the sort of misogynistic, brutal abuse that far too many have suffered.
Break!
Ask the Minister what support he can give to local authorities, and particularly polling station staff, who in fact may be the most vulnerable during the European election campaign.
Well, as the right honourable gentleman knows, we have been consulting upon creating a new electoral offence of intimidating candidates and campaigners. I think as far as the staff are concerned, any intimidation or abuse is prima facie a breach of existing criminal law, and I would hope that political party representatives and presiding officers would have no hesitation in reporting these things to the police.
Don Pursglove.
I'm very clear, and I think the Government is very clear, that it is the duty of all politicians and all parties to call out abuse and intimidation wherever and whenever it happens. But in this particular instance, wouldn't it just be better to keep our promises and call off these farcical elections?
It would indeed be the Government's hope that even now we could agree and ratify the withdrawal agreement, give effect to it, that would make it possible for these elections not to take place. But the only way in which to stop these elections taking place is to bring into effect the withdrawal agreement, or to pass primary legislation through Parliament disapplying our international obligations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But I'm very worried about the fact that other candidates are already trying to intimidate candidates. Using language like fear of God is not a good way to go about our democracy. I was at a conference this morning where a country, Eritrea, was trying to discuss how to build a democracy. Surely the Cabinet Office Minister will wish to be stronger in his language, condemning the outrageous language of other candidates using the words like fear of God.
Mr. Speaker, I think I was very clear in my earlier comments that I think that there is a profound responsibility on politicians, particularly political leaders of any party, to show moderation and restraint in the language they use about political opponents.
Topical questions. Royston Smith.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, could I start by welcoming my honourable friend, the member for Torbay, to his new ministerial role, and to wish my honourable friend, the member for Norwich North, the best of luck as she starts her maternity leave, and to thank her in particular for the work she has championed to stop intimidation in public life. Mr. Speaker, the Cyber UK 2019 Cyber Security Conference begins today in Glasgow. I'm pleased to be addressing that conference tomorrow, where I will be outlining our work to ensure that the UK remains a global leader in cyber security.
Royston Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State and the Minister will know that I never miss an opportunity to talk about jobs and opportunities for my Southampton itching constituents. More people are in work than ever before, but not all jobs are well paid with good opportunities. A government relocation to Southampton would help to give my constituents more opportunities. Has the Minister considered, as the part of the Places for Growth programme, a relocation to Southampton, and if not, why not?
Well, I know what a strong champion my honourable friend is for the city of Southampton. I've heard his representations. I am very happy to extend to him the invitation that officials from my department can meet with him and representatives of Southampton to see what we can do in that area.
Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are currently 2 million European citizens registered to vote in the UK, many of whom will be using their votes in the local elections next Thursday. But in order to be eligible to vote in the European elections on the 23rd of May, they will need to complete some paperwork. Now, so far, fewer than 300 of these citizens have completed the paperwork, which normally would have been distributed by EROs from January onwards. Due to the short timescale of administration of the European elections, I have heard that many European citizens are considering taking legal action against the government. So, can I ask the Minister what consideration he has given to this, and what measures the government may be able to take to help European citizens be able to use their votes in the European elections here in the UK?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the point from the Shadow Minister is about the time to make a declaration rather than the deadline for registration. She will appreciate the government obviously needs to be determined by the law and what affects it, but I must say I'll be happy to look at this and to get back a response to her in writing, and also make a letter copy of that response in the library of the House.
Lee Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I ask the Minister what steps he's taking to encourage the use of innovative technology for the delivery of public services?
Well, this is a major priority for the Cabinet Office. That's why earlier this month I announced £1.5 million in funding for 10 projects that will use location-based data to improve public services, and why I will shortly be publishing a strategy outlining how we will harness the power of innovative technology across the whole of government.
David Perkins.
Speaker, millions of people are not registered on the electoral roll. They're much more likely to be ethnic minority or young or from the lower demographic classes. Doesn't it say everything about this government that at a time when we should be trying to get more people onto the register, they're doing everything they can to keep people off the register?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the government introduced online registration that's made it much easier for people to get on the register, and it's one of the largest numbers registering. So I think the premise of his question is completely wrong.
Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend agree that, as the Institute for Government has recently pointed out, the government has outsourced many public services precisely because the public sector was delivering them poorly, and that any plans to end outsourcing is motivated by political ideology, not by what's doing best for the taxpayer?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight these recent comments. They were clear that Labour's outsourcing policy risks creating major implementation problems and losing the benefits that outsourcing has brought for taxpayers without any guarantee those services would improve. This government will continue to make decisions on outsourcing based on the evidence, not on ideology.
Congratulating the honourable gentleman member for Huddersfield upon the birth of his 12th grandchild, another Shearmanite in the world, I call Mr Barry Shearman.
Thank you for that. I will pass that message on to the new baby. Can I ask the Secretary of State? Yesterday, another little girl, a little Swedish girl, came to this place and reminded us how we must act dramatically to face up to climate change and the challenges of climate change. What is he doing across all departments of state to totally re-energise every department of state facing climate change now?
I think that the young woman to whom he referred spoke for her generation. And all of us going into schools and colleges in our constituency know how this issue of climate change inspires and drives political priorities amongst many of our young constituents. Every department in this government is committed to delivering the ambitious plan to reduce carbon emissions and secure our environmental objectives by the 2050 deadline. There is no difference between any minister about the need to get on with that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my honourable friend join me in welcoming the fact that disabled candidates at the up-and-coming local elections will, thanks to this government, be able to access dedicated disability-related funding to support the specific needs they face without counting towards election expenses?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's vital those standing for office are representative of our society. And as a government, we've taken action to achieve this through a £250,000 fund for disabled candidates at the forthcoming May English local election. This will help create a level playing field for disabled and non-disabled candidates.
Tim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can the Minister further outline what discussions have taken place with social media outlets such as Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter and others to strike the delicate balance of freedom of thought and opinion and security and freedom from cyberbullying?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member alludes to the fact that this will be a delicate balance to strike between ensuring people can freely express opinions and that the government doesn't get involved in the idea of regulating opinions. It's about making sure facts are accurate. That's why we're working with colleagues in DCMS around the online harms white paper to ensure we can tackle those challenges but also strike the right balance in terms of freedom of speech.
I've met with several innovative small businesses in Fareham recently, for example the SME Silver Lining, an IT business. Many of them would like more opportunities to work closely with government. What steps is the government taking to enable contracting with SMEs to take place at a greater level?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this important challenge. That's why we've set a demanding target of 33% of all government business going to SMEs, and why our forthcoming innovation strategy will look at exactly that point, how we can make it easier for SMEs to win innovative government work.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that we need to eradicate fake news at source? And this includes a more ethical approach to government advertising spend to make sure it doesn't go on these online fake news sites?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government takes disinformation very seriously, and of course the Department of Culture, Media and Sport is leading cross-government work to tackle it, including through the online harms white paper. But as I say, the role of government is to make sure electors have the facts, and the facts are there in public debate, not to regulate opinions people may form on them.
Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Jack Brereton.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I've been asked to reply on behalf of my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, who is today in Belfast attending the funeral of Lyra McKee. This was a brutal, cowardly murder of a young woman, a brilliant journalist who represented all that is good in Northern Ireland. And those responsible for her murder have nothing to offer anyone from any community in Northern Ireland. And I'm sure that members right across the House will want to join me in sending our deepest sympathies to Lyra's partner, Sarah, her other family members and her friends. And as her family have asked, we today say that we stand with Lyra. Mr. Speaker, the attack on 3 Christian churches and 3 hotels in Sri Lanka on Easter Sunday was a horrific and cowardly act. and the House will know that a number of British citizens were also killed. Yesterday, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, spoke to the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka to send her condolences to all affected and to offer his government any assistance they may need. I'm sure the whole House will not only want to join me in sending sympathies and condolences to all who were caught up in that horrific attack, but I hope too that the House will perhaps reflect on the fact that that atrocity committed on Easter Sunday came just a couple of weeks after an equally brutal and appalling attack in Christchurch, New Zealand, upon the Muslim community worshipping there. And as we stand today between Easter and next week, the beginning of the solemn month of Ramadan for our Muslim fellow citizens, I hope this will be a time, not just for members, but for all our fellow citizens of all faiths and of none, to come together and to stand up for the values of mutual respect, tolerance and religious diversity, which embody what is best about our country.
Jack Brereton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to echo those thoughts of sympathy and condolence. Rejuvenating our town centres in Stoke-on-Trent is absolutely essential. Would my right honourable friend join me in welcoming the Open Doors pilot recently announced for Fenton in my constituency, and agree that our future High Streets Fund bid for Longton must also succeed?
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to join my honourable friend in welcoming the Open Doors pilot and his constituency, and we very much welcome bids from places like Longton Town Centre for this fund. My right honourable friend, the Community Secretary, is going to study all the bids carefully before making a decision later this year, but he and I know that my honourable friend is going to be a doughty champion of the claims of his constituency in particular.
Emily Thornberry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister for the Cabinet Office and I usually enjoy trading a few jokes at these sessions, but sadly this really isn't a week for laughter. We on this side join him in standing in solidarity and shared grief with the people of Sri Lanka and all those who lost loved ones on the Easter Sunday slaughter of peaceful worshippers and innocent tourists, at least 45 of them children. And among them the 8-year-old cousin of our friend, the member for Hampstead and Kilburn, an act of utter depravity and evil which stands in sharp contrast to the words of love written by Ben Nicholson about his wife and the children that he lost. Yesterday we also celebrated the life, but mourned the loss, of Billy McNeill, the first Briton to lift the European Cup and a man who spent his life fighting against sectarian hatred. And last Thursday we mourned the senseless murder of the brilliant young journalist Lyra McKee, whose funeral the Prime Minister is right to attend, and whose death was a horrific reminder of where sectarian hatred ultimately leads. We stand with Lyra. In her name, Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Minister for the Cabinet Office to tell us what the Government is doing to bring her killers to justice and protect Northern Ireland from a return to terror?
Mr. Speaker, can I first very much welcome both the tone and the words of the Right Honourable Lady. And can I also say that I would share her tribute to Billy McNeill, who died on Monday. He made no fewer than 790 appearances for Celtic. It's a testament to an extraordinary career during which he also won 31 major trophies as a manager and a player. And I think our thoughts and sympathies are with his family and friends. As the Right Honourable Lady will fully understand, the decisions about criminal investigations in Northern Ireland are a matter for the Police Service of Northern Ireland and for the Independent Public Prosecution Service. We very much hope, as a government, that any member of the public who has information that will lead to Lyra's murderers being brought to justice comes forward, and I am hopeful, given the sense of community solidarity that there has been in Londonderry and in Northern Ireland generally, that that information will be forthcoming.
Thornberry.
I thank the Minister for his answer, Mr. Speaker, and I know he speaks with huge authority and passion on this issue. Reading the statement from the so-called new IRA last week, with its talk of attacking enemy forces and its sincere condolences for Lyra's death, it was a sickening throwback to the days that we thought that we'd left behind 20 years ago, from despicable individuals whose only desire is to turn back the clock and destroy the progress that's been made. So does the Minister for the Cabinet Office agree with me? This is one of the central reasons that we must find an answer to the Northern Irish border question rather than give these evil terrorists the divisions that they crave.
I think that I would draw a distinction between the two. I regard both issues that the Right Honourable Lady has raised as important, but I don't think that those murderers in Derry were motivated by any thoughts about the border or about customs arrangements, important though those issues are. I think what the Right Honourable Lady said, that I wholly agreed with, was the utter unacceptability of references to police officers in Northern Ireland as if they were somehow a legitimate target. One of the great achievements of the peace-building process in Northern Ireland has been the very difficult and controversial reform of the police service, where you now have young men and women from both unionist and nationalist communities who serve gladly together, upholding law and justice in Northern Ireland. And we should, all of us in this House, continue to send every officer in the PSNI our full support.
Emily Thornbury.
I agree entirely with the sentiments expressed by the Honourable Gentleman, but can I bring him back to the issue of the border? Because I agree with the ends that he's trying to achieve, but the fundamental problem remains the means. We all know that his own party and the DUP will not accept the current backstop, that the only way the government plans to avoid that backstop is to deliver a so-called invisible border. But last week, we saw a leaked Home Office presentation stating that, and I quote, "No government worldwide currently has a system in place. Current realisation for a technological solution in the UK is 2030. And, they said, there is currently no budget for either a pilot or for the programme itself." So can the Minister tell us, are the Home Office wrong?
Well, I'm not going to comment on alleged leaks from government departments. What I can say to the House is that the government has allocated £20 million to invest in work on alternative measures that would bring benefits in terms of seamless trade, both to the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, but which, if successful, more generally could be applied to give us smart borders on all of the United Kingdom's external borders and perhaps offer us some export opportunities for that technology as well.
Emily Thornbury.
Well, it's interesting what the Minister says, but the Home Office, also says that there are 6 problems with deploying these technological solutions. It's expensive, and there's no budget. 2, it has to operate with 28 different UK government agencies. 3, it needs to operate on both sides of the border. 4, it won't be deliverable until 2030. 5, the government has a poor track record, to say the least, on big tech projects, and no one, 6, in the world has done anything similar. So that, Mr. Speaker, is hardly a recipe for success. The real answer to the Northern Ireland border question is staring the government in the face. 28 months ago, and 2 Brexit secretaries ago, I told the Minister from this dispatch box that the only way to avoid a hard border was staying in a customs union. And, of course, the alignment of all rules and regulations. And he indeed himself said 3 years ago, that for anyone to pretend otherwise, he said, flies in the face of reality. That was the truth then, and it remains the truth today, so why will the government just not wake up to it?
Mr. Speaker, I did say to the Right Honourable Lady in our previous exchange that there is a £20 million budget that has already been earmarked for this work. It is also the case, whatever the Right Honourable Lady may be reading in the newspapers about timetables, that not just the United Kingdom, but the European Union has committed itself to trying to get these alternative measures agreed by 2020. That is not an undertaking, a commitment that the European Commission has entered into lightly and without some thought and analysis about the chances of achieving that. But could I say to the Right Honourable Lady, the solution that she identifies of needing to have a frictionless border on the island of Ireland is what is delivered by the government's withdrawal agreement. Yes. Therefore, what she should be doing is urging her right honourable and honourable friends to vote for what the government is proposing instead of rejecting it and therefore blocking the Brexit which her party's manifesto commits her to.
Emily Thornberry.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've heard it all before, let's face it. The only point the Minister didn't make this time was that Britain must be able to establish her own international trade agreements. Perhaps he's been listening to Nancy Pelosi last week, who made it clear that if the UK government disrupted the open border in Northern Ireland, we could forget all about a free trade deal with the US. So the government is going to spend millions giving Donald Trump the red carpet, golden carriage treatment in June, and maybe the state banquet might even be worth it, so long as he's forced to sit next to Greta Thunberg. Or how about this? If then he has Greta on one side and David Attenborough on the other, that would be 3 hours well spent. But the truth is, Mr. Speaker, that it will all be a giant waste of taxpayers' money because the US Congress will never agree to a trade deal unless we have a solution for the Irish border that will actually work. And this government simply doesn't have one.
Mr. Speaker, you know, it's just 2 short years ago that the Right Honourable Lady said of President Trump, "We should welcome the American president. We have to work with him." I just wonder whether something has changed about the US administration or whether something has changed about her own leadership ambitions that causes her to alter her words in this way now.
Which is it? Come on, which is it?
The government and the Labour Party, I thought, both wanted to see no tariffs, no quotas, no rules of origin checks, a seamless border on the island of Ireland. Yet 3 times, the Right Honourable Lady and her colleagues have voted against a deal that would deliver those things to which they claim to be committed. It is about time that she put principle and the national interest ahead of party advantage.
Emily Thornberry.
I think, Mr. Speaker, we'll find that there's only one side of this House that has a leadership contest at the moment, and it's very active as we speak. But, Mr. Speaker, in a week like this, when we have all been shocked and saddened by the horrific acts of terrorism at home and abroad, we remember that the first job of any government is to keep our country and our citizens safe. And even before our concerns about the economy, the main reason we need to keep an open border with Ireland is to preserve that peace and security that millions of British and Irish citizens have come to depend upon, but which, in a week like this, seems to hang like a thread. So if the government is serious about putting the country first, the whole of our country, will the Minister for the Cabinet Office accept? That means finally getting serious about the cross-party negotiations and putting the option of a customs union on the table.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the Honourable Lady's not been in the room at the Times. I think she's now being described as in the sort of outer inner circle around the Labour leadership. But I can say that the substance and the tone of those conversations between the government team and the opposition team have been constructive. I think that there is a genuine attempt to try to find a way through, but I'm not going to hide the fact, Mr. Speaker, that this is very difficult, because if it's going to work, it will mean both parties needing to make compromises and us ending up with a solution that, unlike any other so far proposed, will get a majority in the House. So far, this House has rejected our deal. It has rejected the opposition's proposals. It has rejected a referendum. It has rejected revocation. It has rejected a customs union. It has rejected Common Market 2.0. And it's not just a matter for, frankly, for government or even for the opposition front bench. It is a matter for every member of this House to take our responsibilities to the country seriously and find a way to agree on an outcome that enables us to deliver on the referendum result and to take this country forward.
Tom Pursglove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I also associate myself with the sentiments so eloquently expressed on both sides of the House? Far from what some would have you believe, those of us who voted to leave knew exactly what we were voting for. We were voting to control our own borders, to spend our own money, to make our own laws and have those laws judged by our own judges. The Labour policy now appears to be to hold a second referendum. Will my right honourable friend confirm that on his watch and that of the Prime Minister there will be no second referendum? Yes or no?
The government is very clear indeed that we do not agree with a second referendum, and we have voted against a second referendum. All of us in 2016 recall telling our electors that their decision was going to be final and would be accepted whatever the outcome of that referendum would be. And I think it would do harm to fragile public confidence in our political institutions were that commitment to be set aside.
Ian Blackford. No.
SNP would join in saying that we're horrified by the atrocious attacks in Sri Lanka, and the Minister of the Cabinet Office is right that we should, all of us from all religions and none, should be considering religious tolerance and should be ensuring that we champion that. Our thoughts as the funeral commences shortly are with the family and friends of Lyra McKee, and we'd like to make clear that we stand with Lyra. We'd also like to join the celebration of Billy McNeill's life and work, and of course in addition to Celtic he was previously a manager for Aberdeen as well in his time. Mr. Speaker, climate change is the biggest crisis facing the world today. Even the Environment Secretary has admitted that his government has failed to do enough. Yesterday he promised that the UK government would take action. Mr. Speaker, this government has spent millions on nuclear power, they've cut support for renewable energy projects, and they've continued to pursue fracking. So does taking action include reversing these damaging policies?
Mr. Speaker, I think, as my right honourable friend, the Environment Secretary, said yesterday, that there is clearly more that needs to be done, and probably all of us of an age to be here would recognise that our generations have not done sufficient to meet this challenge. But I think that the honourable lady underestimates how much work has been done by the United Kingdom. I mean, since 2010, we've reduced CO2 emissions faster than any other G20 nation. Between 2010 and 2018, we reduced greenhouse gas emissions by about a quarter overall. Our renewable energy capacity has quadrupled since 2010, and the proportion of our electricity coming from low-carbon resources has increased from 19% to more than half in 2018, a record year for renewables. There's a lot more to do, but I think it's a good record on which to base that future action.
Kirsty Blackburn.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think that answer recognises the scale of the challenge that we face. The Scottish Government have already brought forward a climate change bill with some of the most ambitious statutory targets of any country in the world, with the aim of Scotland being carbon neutral by 2050, and if we need to go further, we will. Mr. Speaker, the UK Government commissioned new advice from the UK Committee on Climate Change, and it's due next week, on what the UK's targets should be. Can he confirm that when the advice is published next week, that the UK Government will adopt the recommended targets immediately and in full?
I'm going to wait to see what the advice is, and I'm sure the House will want to see what the advice is, as well as learn from the government directly what its decisions are going to be. But can I say to the honourable lady that passing legislation can get you so far, but actually what you need is not just legislation, it is a change in attitudes and approach that runs right across society and right across industry. And what I am encouraged by is that while since 1990 the UK has cut its emissions by 40%, in that same period our economy has grown by 2/3. So greater prosperity and green policies are not incompatible. They can and should be made to work together.
Colin Clark.
Mr. Speaker, can I associate myself with the words of the front benches? Mr. Speaker, to assure the British summer appetite for strawberries and Scottish rasps is fulfilled, would my right honourable friend encourage the Home Office to extend the seasonal agricultural workers scheme from 2,500 to 10,000 this year and open it up to 30,000 to 40,000 next year to make sure our appetites are fulfilled?
Well, as I would have expected, my honourable friend rightly champions both the produce of his constituency and the needs of businesses there. What I'd say to him is that obviously we have established a 2-year pilot that provides for a 6-month scheme for non-EU migrants to work on UK farms and specifically designed to help the horticultural sector. The pilot's never been designed to meet the full labour needs of the horticultural sector, and clearly we will need to evaluate what happens with that pilot in practice, but I know that the Secretary of State for Scotland and the Secretary of State for Environment and Agriculture will be looking very closely at the impact on the north east of Scotland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2015, the Prime Minister, when she was Home Secretary, said that the Police Federation were crying wolf over the impact of police cuts. Now, teachers, specialist children's and youth workers and others are warning that government cuts are making it harder to protect young people from knife crime. In my current constituency crime survey, many constituents are saying that cuts to services that support young people, as well as cuts to policing, need to be reversed. So could the Minister for the Cabinet Office tell me whether he thinks children and youth workers and my constituents are crying wolf too?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the facts are that the government has increased police funding by more than £970 million for the next year, and the Labour Party voted against that increase in funding when the order came before the House of Commons. But the Honourable Lady is right to say that this is not only about policing and new laws, it is about early intervention. That's why my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has secured £220 million for early intervention projects to try to steer young people at risk of knife crime and other violent crime away from the gangs that can seduce them into that appalling way of life.
Rebecca Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, passions are running high, including my own, about the devastating effects of climate change. And whilst I believe this government has made great strides decarbonising faster than any country in the G20, we must do more faster and sooner for a sustainable future. So would my right honourable friend ask the Prime Minister to join me in supporting a cross-party call for net zero emissions ahead of 2020? That's greater than our current calls and targets. Sorry, ahead of 2050. That's more stringent, Mr. Speaker, than our current targets. Almost 200 cross-party MPs have signed a letter calling for this, and it was instigated by my colleague from Middlesbrough, South and East Cleveland. And would he also ask the Prime Minister to meet colleagues and I to discuss enshrining this in law, as proposed by my honourable friend from Cheltenham in his forthcoming 10-minute rule bill?
Well, can I first of all pay tribute to my honourable friend for the way in which she has championed this and other environmental issues during her time in the House. And I can certainly say that, a minister, I don't know whether with the Prime Minister or another colleague, will be happy to see her and other parliamentary colleagues. I hope you understand that we will want to look at the advice of the Independent Climate Change Committee to understand what would be needed to get to that early zero emissions target and the practical steps that would involve. But I can assure her that we are investing more than £2.5 billion to support low-carbon innovation in the UK in the next 6 years alone. Clean growth is a priority for the government and will remain so.
So far, I'm afraid we've managed to get through only 13 questions in more than 25 minutes, so we do need to speed up, as I wish to accommodate backbench members patiently waiting to put their inquiries. Stuart C. MacDonald.
Mr. Speaker, the proposed closure of Cumbernauld Tax Office will see 1,300 good quality jobs lost to the town and many others under threat as millions of pounds of spending disappears from the local economy. And that's just one of over 150 tax office closures being overseen by the Treasury. So if the government genuinely wants to build stronger towns and is concerned about towns like Cumbernauld, surely the government must now put a stop to HMRC's damaging tax office closure.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, I completely understand the concerns that there will be, particularly amongst some hard-working civil servants in Cumbernauld, who were expecting to be reassigned. There is a difference now happening in the way in which citizens choose to interact with HMRC, with fewer people wanting or needing to access an office and more people being willing and choosing to work with the taxman online, and that is clearly going to have implications. It seems to me that the priority has to be that we maintain a high quality of service to businesses and to individual taxpayers.
Mr. Douglas Ross.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister will be aware of wildfires burning across the country, including one in Murray, which started near Nakando on Monday and continues despite the efforts of more than 50 firefighters. Will my right honourable friend join me in congratulating and praising Incident Commander Bruce Fackerson and all the teams involved and the other emergency services who have made this a multi-agency response, and also urge people to assist the fire service by keeping away from the area to allow the dedicated and committed firefighters to bring this blaze under control.
I'm happy to endorse my honourable friend's tribute to the Fire and Rescue Service in his constituency, and also to support his words encouraging members of the public to cooperate fully with those services.
Is it the government's intention to bring forward the withdrawal agreement implementation bill and to prorogue Parliament if it loses at second reading? And wouldn't it in fact be far safer for the government simply to link the Prime Minister's deal to a people's vote and bring that forward to Parliament?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the problem with that proposal is that so far, whenever the idea of a second referendum has been brought before the House, there has been a majority against that. So I don't think that the Right Honourable Gentleman's proposal is actually going to deliver the outcome that he seeks.
Mr. David Tredennick.
Mr. Speaker, may I associate myself with the remarks made about Sri Lanka? My right honourable friend tell us whether he thinks it likely we'll leave the European Union by May the 22nd. And does he agree with me that both the major political parties are likely to suffer at the polls if we don't? And what does it say to my Leicestershire constituents about the democratic process if this House can't get this withdrawal agreement to leave the European Union over the line?
Speaker, I completely understand and share that sense of exasperation that my honourable friend has expressed. I mean, it has been made very clear from this dispatch box on several occasions that the consequence of the House voting to reject the withdrawal agreement and to vote in favour of an extension is that the government would need to make preparations as required by law for those European elections. The way in which we solve this problem is for Parliament to assemble a majority behind a deal, vote for it, get the legislation through and give effect to our departure from the EU.
Mary Glendon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Having experienced their average salary fall by over £2,000 a year since 2010 and expecting just 1% pay rise this year, civil servants in the PCS union are rightly being balloted for industrial action. Will the Minister tell the House when these civil servants will be free of austerity measures and receive a substantial pay rise which is long overdue?
Well, there has been, because of the scale of the deficit which was inherited in 2010, the need for severe restraints over public expenditure, including public sector pay. Where we are today, Mr. Speaker, is that there is flexibility within the overall pay ceiling, department by department, for departments to negotiate with their workforces arrangements that do permit higher figures for an increase in wages than the ones to which the Honourable Lady has referred.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Sunday, over 40,000 people will take part in the London Marathon. Many of them are supporting the dementia revolution on behalf of Alzheimer's research and the Alzheimer's Society. Some of those are sitting on these benches. The UK is the world leader in dementia research. I visited the Dementia Research Institute with members of the Science and Technology Select Committee today. Will the government continue to support dementia research, encourage more people, especially people in their 30s, 40s and 50s, to take part in research trials, and wish the very best of luck to everyone in the marathon on Sunday?
Well, can I join my honourable friend in wishing success and strength to everybody taking part in the marathon on Sunday, particularly to members on all sides of this House, and I suspect to one or two people in the press gallery as well, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend makes a very important point about dementia. One of the welcome changes we're seeing is that, as a society, we are more open about the fact that many of us are going to live with dementia at some stage in our lives. That government commitment to which he referred to dementia research and to trying to remove the stigma from dementia will be maintained.
Last count, I was aware of no fewer than 16 honourable and right honourable members of the House intending to take part in the London Marathon, including the Secretary of State for Wales and indeed the Honourable Lady, the member for Brentford and Isleworth, from whom we heard earlier, but who was too modest or self-effacing to mention her prospective involvement. Mr. Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think I could run the London Marathon, so you needn't have told me that.
You can walk it, Sammy. Walk it.
While the McKee family in Northern Ireland are burying their daughter today, murdered by IRA terrorists, hundreds of people in Sri Lanka are burying their loved ones, brutally murdered because of their faith. Christians across the world are now the most persecuted religious group, with nearly 300 million living in fear of discrimination and persecution, and 4,000 being killed every year because of their faith. The government has said that Britain is on their side. Can the Minister tell us, how is the government using the UK's soft power, our economic power, our contacts with other governments and our aid budget to help those who are persecuted daily simply because they believe in Jesus Christ?
I mean, the aid budget and the Foreign Office diplomatic expenditure budget will continue to give a priority to human rights, including the rights of Christians and people of other faiths. So the right honourable gentleman is quite correct in saying that in many countries Christians do face persecution and discrimination. We work to try to improve standards of justice and of civil rights in those countries. We work with Christian and other religious communities who are under threat. And my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, has recently commissioned a review in particular of our work to help persecuted Christians overseas, to make sure that we are focusing the right degree of resource and effort in delivering those improvements in outcome that the right honourable gentleman quite rightly seeks.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, current immigration requirements oblige Commonwealth servicemen and women to pay £2,389 to apply for indefinite leave to remain after 4 years' service, or almost £10,000 for a family of 4. This considerable cost does not reflect the nation's respect for those prepared in extremis to give their lives for our country. I therefore written a cross-party letter with the Honourable Member from Bridgend, signed by 130 Members of Parliament, to the Home Secretary to seek his support to abolish these visa fees. At a time when the UK is Chair of the Commonwealth, would my right honourable friend and the Prime Minister give their support for this great non-party political cause that is supported by the Royal British Legion?
I want, Mr. Speaker, to pay tribute to men and women from Commonwealth countries who serve in our armed services. That service is something that this and previous governments have valued enormously. On the particular point that my honourable friend makes about immigration requirements, I'm sure that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, will take very seriously and look very carefully at the representations that he is making.
Young man! When last month a football referee in Nottinghamshire had to flee a game, lock himself in the car and call the police, the FA response was a 6-match ban and a £50 fine. Considering what's happening to Raheem Sterling, Danny Rose and the growth of racism at every level in football, and their call for a national forum, isn't it clear that the football authorities are not capable, without our help and government help, of actually getting on top of this problem, particularly of racism in football? Will the government not take a lead in the way the Prime Minister did on Hillsborough and help convene, using their auspices, such a forum as Mr Sterling and others have requested this summer? And perhaps, Mr Speaker, you might offer this location as an appropriate venue for such a forum.
Mr Speaker, I think every member of this House will condemn without reservation the behaviour to which the honourable member referred. It is something that should be regarded as completely beyond the bounds of acceptability in our society. I can undertake that my honourable friend, the Sports Minister, will want to sit down with him and any other colleagues in the House who make this a priority in order to discuss what more might be done.
Costa.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Yesterday, Jane Golding, who chairs the British in Europe, representing over 1.3 million British nationals in the EU27, reminded me that Michel Barnier's letter is almost 1 month old in terms of responding to the requirement of this House to carve out citizens' rights element in the withdrawal agreement. Given the absence of a withdrawal agreement being passed in this House, can my right honourable friend inform the House what actions the government has taken since receiving Michel Barnier's letter?
Well, as I recall, what my honourable friend sought successfully was that the government should make representations to the Commission, asking them if they would carve the citizens' rights elements out of the withdrawal agreement overall. I think that there are some legal problems with that, in that the withdrawal agreement stands together as a package, and as a package has been submitted to the European Parliament, having been formally and legally approved by the European Council. And therefore, to separate elements of that might mean having to go through those European procedures again, assuming the political willingness to do so were there. But I will ask my right honourable friend, the Brexit Secretary, to speak urgently to my honourable friend to give him an update on where we are on this.
Bill Esterson.
It's complacent to claim we are on target to meet our climate change obligations when emissions from air freight and shipping of imports and exports are excluded from the figures. Will this government be honest about the scale of the challenge of climate change? We need to fully invest in renewable energy, drop the fascination with fracking, and declare a climate change emergency, because that's the reality of what we face.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the rules on emissions from shipping are not sort of unique to the United Kingdom. These are global standards of measurement. And as I said in earlier exchanges, Mr. Speaker, the government's first to say that there is more that needs to be done, but I think that the honourable gentleman does us an injustice in not acknowledging that we have a better track record on this than any other member of the G7. He asked about investment. Our annual support for renewables will be more than £10 billion by 2021. We've opened the world's largest offshore wind farm, capable of powering 600,000 homes, the world's first ever floating offshore wind farm. 99% of solar power that we have in the UK has been deployed since 2010. That is a good track record.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
The government accept that the telecommunications firm Huawei is intimately linked with the Chinese Communist government and its deeply hostile intelligence services?
Minister. Well, I mean, legally speaking, it is a private firm, not a government-owned company. But my right honourable friend takes us to the question about the proposed rollout of 5G networks. The Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport has commissioned a very wide-ranging, thorough review of this. We are giving priority to stronger cybersecurity practices across the entire telecommunications sector, greater resilience in telecommunications networks, and critically, diversity in the entire supply chain for 5G, because this question goes beyond any single company. When we've taken decisions about that review, we will announce them to the House in a proper way.
Right honourable gentleman, member for New Forest East, as I do, I think the Minister will recognise that he'll probably hear from his right honourable friend on this matter, well, a few hundred more times in the coming weeks. Chris Elmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government continues to chronically underfund the Welsh railway network, with planned spending running at 6%, despite having 11% of the network. So can he set out when the government will start investing in Welsh railway infrastructure and give Welsh commuters the investment they deserve?
Mr. Speaker, we're investing record amounts in Wales railway infrastructure. Network rail investment in the Wales route for control period 6 that takes us up to 2024 will be more than £1.5 billion. It'll deliver improved journeys for passengers in Wales on the most advanced new trains, and in South Wales, passengers and commuters are already experiencing real improvements thanks to the new Intercity Express trains, each of them having 130 extra seats compared with a typical high-speed train. I really would have wished that the honourable gentleman could have paid tribute to that achievement rather than carping.
Stephen Kerr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I may add a few words of tribute of my own to Billy McNeill, who was a childhood hero of mine and truly a legendary Celt. His family, reminiscent of the question that was asked earlier by the honourable member for Chelmsford, his family have described his brave struggle with dementia. And, Mr. Speaker, my own mother passed away earlier this year due to the effects of dementia. Scottish universities are doing world-leading research into the prevention of dementia, and they currently receive about £100 million of funding each year from the European Union. Will my right honourable friend confirm that this funding will be maintained and this research will be protected as we leave the European Union?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, if we get the implementation period envisaged by the withdrawal agreement, then those funding arrangements will continue until the end of the implementation period. At that point, there will need to be decisions by government as a whole about its spending priorities, including on medical research. But as I said in response to our honourable friend, the member for Chelmsford, the government's commitment to dementia research and to ending the stigma on dementia is something that will continue.
Danielle Rowley.
Average wages stagnating for more than a decade, in-work poverty rising faster than employment, and we're hurtling towards a climate disaster. What a mess, Mr. Speaker. But in Midlothian, Enterprising renewable firms and organisations are doing sector-leading work and providing good jobs, but they tell me they're not getting enough support from the government. So the Minister has boasted about renewables in this session, but will he recognise it's not enough and say what more he's going to do and what more the government are going to do to support leading work on renewables in my constituency?
Minister!
What we're seeing in this country is not only the £10 billion that I spoke about in the earlier exchange, but we are seeing enterprising, innovative companies, large and small, seizing the opportunities of developing green technology and renewable energy technology in a way that will take advantage not just of the change in the domestic market, but of that growing export market globally as well. The government will continue through its industrial strategy to work for green growth, and I hope very much that businesses in Midlothian will benefit from that, like businesses elsewhere in the UK.
Just giving on in, Ray.
Mr. Speaker, at the most recent indicative votes, the opposition did move one of its key red lines and supported a proposal that did not specify a permanent customs union, in fact supported customs arrangements, a temporary customs union followed by alternative arrangements. Now that the government and the opposition are virtually on the same page, is it not now the time to put party politics to one side and agree a deal in the national interest?
My honourable friend makes an important point, and as we look to the future relationship with the European Union, we are looking at the customs arrangement that would be in place as part of that future relationship. And we've already indicated, and this is reflected in the existing text of the political declaration, that we want to retain the benefits of a customs union, no tariffs, no quotas and no rules of origin checks. And we remain focused on agreeing an approach that delivers on the result of the referendum, which was for the UK to leave, and I hope that it will be possible to bring members from all sides of the House together in support of a customs arrangement as part of a wider approach to our future relationship with the European Union that enables us to get on with this task in the way that the British people expect.
Finally, patience rewarded. Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. And to go back to what the Minister started with in this session, in a few minutes the funeral of Lyra McKee will begin in Belfast, and the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition are both present, rightly so, and we extend our deepest sympathies to her partner Sarah and to her family and friends at this terrible time. And the message across Northern Ireland is that violence is not acceptable and will never succeed, never has been acceptable and never will. And will the Minister agree that the utterly repulsive statement from those who carried out this terrible atrocity, that somehow the murder of police officers is totally legitimate and it was just an accident that Lyra was killed, that in standing with Lyra today, we stand with everyone, journalists, police officers, all who serve the community in Northern Ireland. An attack on any one of them is an attack on us all.
Minister!
Mr. Speaker, I agree with every word that the Right Honourable Member has said. I thought that the finest riposte to those sickening claims by the terrorists was that there in the Cregan estate in Derry, the leaders of both the Democratic Unionist Party and Sinn Féin came together, putting aside the real differences between them, to reject the path towards violence and terror. The joint statement by all party leaders in Northern Ireland rejecting terrorism, and the visible expressions of both grief and anger towards the terrorists by the communities of both nationalist and unionist in the city of Derry, Londonderry, has been a visible but also the most compelling, moving riposte to the evil claims of those behind that terrorist act. Those political leaders, those communities in Derry, spoke for the reality and for the heart of the people of Northern Ireland.
Thank you. Order. Order. Urgent question. Sir Vincent Cable.
Will the Foreign Office Minister make a statement on the representations that the government has made to the Saudi government?
Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rate clause. Well more than a year since Alison Thewlis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rate clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rate clause was somehow double support for women and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time to aim high, look resolutely outwards, and never, ever accept second best. Above all, it's time to believe that we can. We can build that better country we know is possible. And friends, we will.
If you enjoy watching our programmes, please help us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster by signing up to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.